And as you can tell by my accent, I'm the Australian. During the 10th and final theme week of Expo is where we are at the moment, and this week is Water Week. The week's focus question is, how will we protect our most precious resource today for tomorrow? Water fuels our sustenance, but also moves money, moves goods and people around the world. It provides a valuable source of renewable energy excuse me, and enables the world's food to grow. Expo is a platform for bringing together citizens and stakeholders to understand how to preserve and sustainably manage this precious finite resource for infinite users. The program will highlight the true value of water, as well as progress best practice in ensuring clean and adequate water for people, industry and the planet. That comes from the Expo Guide. And this week truly has been an exciting week for the water world. And here at the Women's Pavilion, we take a look at these issues through a gender lens. Since every topic today, from the SDGs to COP, should be including the female perspective and point of view to ensure equality and harmony around the world. My name is Carleen Maywald, and I'm the South Australian Water Ambassador. I was a member of the South Australian Parliament for 13 years, and I served as Minister for Water for 6 years. I was the first woman ever elected to the electorate, the district that I was elected in. It was a rural irrigation district. And I was the first female leader of the National Party. The National Party is the party I represented in Australia. And I was the first sitting member in the South Australian Parliament to have a baby while being a sitting member of Parliament. I'll be your moderator today for the great Majlis that we're about to have, and we thank the organisers who have prepared this for us and enabled this to happen. I welcome our audience, our live audience that's with us here today at the Women's Pavilion, and to all those watching and our live stream audience. This afternoon, we'll be discussing how to better involve women in the access and governance of water resources. And our first area of focus will be around the contributions that women make in the management of water resources. To get started, I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful panellists, who can start by introducing themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves and their story and where they've travelled to from today to be here with us. I'll go to you first, Ilya.
Hi, my name is Ilia Espino de Marota. I am from Panama. I am the Deputy Administrator of the Panama Canal. First woman to be appointed Deputy Administrator for the Panama Canal in over 100 years of operation. So I'm very happy to be here, ready to share a lot of good information with the panel, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Ilya. Salma.
Thank you. My name is Selma bin Break, short travel, just from Abu Dhabi, born and raised in Abu Dhabi. And I'm really grateful to be here amongst the panelists, very honored really and humbled to be here. My role in GHD, I lead advisory services, so we do a lot of management and engineering consulting around water. And I've been very grateful in my short career of 17 years to be involved in design work of water infrastructure, permitting work, and also policy work around water management. So grateful to share my journey with you today.
Thank you, Selma. Ferial.
Hi, my name is Ferial Salahuddin, and I've come from Karachi, Pakistan. I started my career in the power sector, where I was working with banks and multilaterals. And then I transitioned to starting my own company called Uptrade, Goats for Water. And we work with smallholder farmers, and we are enabling them to access assets such as solar water pumps, lighting, fans, using their livestock as money. And I'm really happy to be here and excited to share my stories and hear your stories today.
So what an amazing group of women we've gathered here today for you, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So we'll start with you first, Ilya. So tell me some more about what it's like being at the helm of the operations of something as big as the Panama Canal.
Well, the Panama Canal, as we know, and is very relevant to the topic, runs in freshwater. We're basically a water elevator and moves ships from the ocean through the mountains of Panama in an artificial lake. We raise the vessels 85 feet above sea level, bring them to the next site. So for Panama Canal, water is a precious resource. And we have seen how the weather patterns have changed. So we went from abundant rain. We actually had to spill water every year because we had not enough capacity to store it, to having to be very careful on how we use water. And when we used to have a drought every 15 or 20 years, we see now that every 3 to 4 years we could have a very dry year. So this entitles us to have draft restrictions to vessels, which is not very good for customers because then they can bring less goods. So we have a very intense daily operation on how we use or how we manage our water resources. We also have a very important watershed that we managed, and that's where women get very involved in our watershed. We have to protect our forests, so we have a lot of projects that do training for the young kids, and about 44%, we have a program that is called Guardians of the Watershed. 44% are girls, and they're being trained to be able to save the forest, keep the forest, because also besides the importance of the canal for transiting the ships through, 55% of the population of Panama takes water from the lakes that permit transits. So we have, by constitutional title, to preserve water for the population to drink potable water and transiting ships. And the lakes that we have are artificial lakes. They were built in 1914, the first one, and then in 1939 we built the secondary one. So you can imagine shipping has increased significantly from the 1914s and the 1939s to now, and the population of the country has increased significantly. So what maybe was more than enough, now it's a limited resource that we watch very carefully. We also are very in charge of the quality of the water. And now we're envisioning a $2 billion project to guarantee and secure enough water for the operation of the canal and the potable water. We put about 13,000 ships through the canal. And with the expanded canal that we inaugurated in 2016, we have dropped a little bit of the number of vessels, but they're much bigger. They carry a lot more capacity, so we really have increasing tonnage, and that is good for conservation of water. The other interesting feature that we put in the new construction of the new locks is we put water-saving basins that allow us to recycle the water of the transits. 60% of the water gets recycled for the next transit. So the new locks, even though they're much bigger, they use 7% less water than the original locks. And when we have a very dry year, we now, through innovation, we have created a way of replicate what we do with the water-saving basins in the new locks in the old locks, because we have 2 lanes. So we do what we call transverse flow of water, and that allows us also to save some water. So that, in a nutshell, is a little bit the Panama Canal and its importance on the water resource.
It's very evident Ilya knows her job. The question I'd like to know from you, though, is what's it like to be at the helm of that as a woman?
I've been working in the canal for over 35 years, and I have moved from, I started working as a young engineer in the shipyard, the repair facility for all of our boats. So I've been moving around in many different locations, many different jobs, always surrounded by men. And so I felt very comfortable because even when I went to school, we were only 2 ladies in the faculty. I'm a marine engineer by trade. So it's been a beautiful career, getting more responsibility each time, always being promoted by a man, always replaced the men who left. I took their job. So I was the first woman vice president of engineering, the first woman in operations, and actually when I left engineering, I left 2 female managers. When I got to operations, there's no women except me. So I'm trying to dig down there some women that could be promoted because there's a lot of talent. It just hasn't been discovered and promoted. So that's my role now. And manage the operations on a daily basis besides everything that comes with a big company. Human resources, finance, marketing, communications.
Certainly a lot of responsibility.
Yes.
Salma, working here in the UAE, What can you tell us about your projects in and around Abu Dhabi and about the female decision-making culture here in the UAE?
So I think the story of the UAE is one of a success story, which I'd like to share with everyone. Starting from the founding father, Sheikh Zayed, Allah yarhamu, and the story of when, just prior to him becoming the leader of Abu Dhabi, when he went to some of the tribal leaders and said, "You've got some water wells, how about we share those with other individuals who need them?" And as you know, it's a scarce resource like everywhere else, and especially in this arid geography. And so what he did is went out and found more water wells and then went back to the tribal leaders and said, "How about we share this resource with everyone?" And so through that, he was able to change water ownership or water well ownership to become more equitable. And then at the back of that, started building an economy even before oil, based on water, trade, agriculture. And when oil came, started building schools and just embedded in that the requirement for women to be in schools. So the first university was also formed just after the UAE was formed, the UAE University, and had a women's section. His wife, Sheikha Fatima, established the Women's Association, again, at the beginning of the formation of the UAE. So embedded in our values is the need for women to be in the education and workplace. So having that leadership and collaborative style and having women embedded in education and the workplace, that has really paved the way for women in this culture. And it didn't come with, it's not like it didn't come with challenges, there were challenges. I think part of that is influencing the culture and influencing people for women to come into the workplace and come into the education system. So that took a bit of time. And growing up, I'm one of 6 kids and 5 brothers, so I'm the only female. Growing up as well in an engineering, workplace, a lot of times, just like you, Ilya, I was one of many males and male engineers. But having the right leadership, I think, has helped me find my voice, has helped me also encourage women coming into the workplace, which is, I think, important is for younger professionals to see those role models and pull them into engineering, pull them into the workplace. What I've seen change, Catherine, in terms of decision-making is as I'm going up the ladder and seeing less and less women, just like you, Ilya, I'm seeing a shift now when we're bringing in women. I'm seeing a shift in decision making. We're seeing more empathy when people are making decisions around, if we're talking about water infrastructure, for example, or policy. We see more thinking about the end users when we're designing for water infrastructure, when we're designing policy to be more inclusive, for example. So I've certainly seen this change, and I've also started seeing more and more women coming into the workplace and staying for longer. The challenge we've got here in the UAE, while 70% of STEM subjects are made up of women, going into the workplace, we don't see them staying beyond the 5 years. So that's one of the challenges that we are seeing here.
Why do you think that is?
I think traditionally, engineering and the water sector has been seen as like very male-dominating. I know, Ferial, you've got a few stories to share with us. It's seen as a dirty, plumbing and water leaks, which is really not the case because we do need other skills when we're dealing with water management. We do need negotiation. And who better to negotiate than the mom of 3 kids, negotiating what to share with the kids. So we've got other skills that are required around water politics and diplomacy as well. That's something that's required. So I think traditionally it's seen as a male-dominating sector, and we need to start breaking those barriers.
I was very interested in the origins of the UAE and that it was around water and water wells, and the world talks about now water diplomacy, and that was water diplomacy in real action. Often our Australian Foreign Affairs Department talks about the importance of water policy, and when we move around the world, a lot of countries want to talk to Australia about water. Feria, what's your experience in Pakistan?
So I work with communities that are possibly the most marginalized. And in the communities that I work with, women are very involved with the management of the water, but they have very little say in when we negotiate with the communities. So when we start our work, we go into the communities, kind of like what you were saying back in the day. These communities are still back in the day a bit, where a community comes together and they share a well. And they, as a community, decide that we are going to purchase a solar pump, which is going to help us get water out of the ground. And as we go in, each community member decides that I'm going to give so many goats, he's going to give so many, and the community gets those goats together, they pay us in goats, and the community, then we go in and install a pump. So initially, what we started noticing was that it was women who were the ones who had to walk, who had to pull the water out, and yet we weren't seeing women when we would go into a community and talk to them, that this is what our work is, this is what we need from you, and the negotiations would kind of break down somewhere. Being there made it easier in the sense that we started inviting the women to come in and also share the whole process. And as soon as we saw that happening and women using the power which is more behind the doors, be able to convince the men that yes, we need this, let's get this. And we saw a more faster sort of execution there. So that has been the experience, and now when we go in, we try and invite women to sort of be part of the conversation. But in Pakistan, women own very few assets, and in these communities, it's the men who are at the forefront of negotiations, because women just don't have access to markets and they don't have a place, or rather, to go out into the markets to be able to sell the livestock or negotiate on that. So the men end up having a lot more control here.
You know, it's interesting that in the Panama Canal, in the watershed, there's a lot of people that live in the area and they were not landowners, so they have no assets. So the Panama Canal has a project that we do the titling of the land, of the property for the people that live there. So they have a title, so they would have access to be able to make loans for any improvements they want in the area. And by providing the titling, we also make them environmental payments if they protect the area where they're living, because now they own it and they have a good asset, but they also get the incentive from the Panama Canal to preserve the forest. We give them education about reforestry of the area, and they also have plantations for foods that they can either consume or sell as a marketing, and we also teach them how to do plants to sell for decoration, so they can have an industry. So it's really good when you, and 50% of the titles that we have established are for women. So they're having a little bit of say in the matter, and also we have these advisory councils on the watershed, and about 38% are women. So it's good to have that balance. And I always say, you know, it's not that one's better than the other one, it's that we complement each other, and we think differently. And I like what you said about being empathy. Women are more empathic, so they think about other things that men not necessarily look at right away. So I think it's a better decision-making when you have a balanced decision-making group.
Yes, exactly. So how do you feel about that, Salma, and how do you see that playing out in your workplace?
Yeah, I was just reflecting when Ferial mentioned around women not owning assets and not having a say, and she said the men are involved in the negotiation. And negotiation skills, I find, when I've been in the workplace, a lot of the women are more open to listening to diverse opinions and thoughts. And so, Elia, to your point, wouldn't it be better to have a balance of men and women doing that negotiation so that we can have different thoughts taken into consideration. It's so funny, the story you told about the men involved in selling of water. In East Africa, it's the women who manage resources. They also they ration the water for more sustainable use for their families. And then when is a man involved, it's when they go out to sell it. And there's even a saying, we only see the men in the water process when he has the bucket on his head to go out to sell water. Yeah. And so I think for more sustainable use, bringing women into the decision-making process, to your point, Catherine, is really valuable.
Yeah, and there's an interesting story about, today I was speaking to one of our managers, and in one of the villages, one of the wells has been dismantled, and he said half the panels are with this man, half the panels are with this man, the pump itself is with the third man, because they started sort of fighting about who gets more water out of the well. And this is just one community. Thankfully, it hasn't happened elsewhere. And I was just thinking to myself, if women were the ones who had the idea of owning these assets, which technically they do, I don't think this would have happened, because women, when we go and speak to them about how has this changed your life, they will talk about things like, my child used to cry for water and we had so little, we would give them milk first. And if he cried again, then we would give them water. I think given that empathy and that sort of concern, which is wider than this is my panel and these are my goats, I think decision-making would look very, very sort of different.
Absolutely.
I know in my experience around the cabinet table as a minister in government, excuse me, in my experience around the ministerial cabinet table, men think very differently to women about things, and often the conversation when you were talking about water assets and water infrastructure, and the men are involved in the engineering side of things, and it's the sums and it's the calculations and it's the engineering that's important. Whereas with women, it's more focused on the end users and who are the stakeholders and who cares about this. And when you have those two conversations coming together, the outcome that you actually develop can be far more sustainable. And I think, Farrell, you were talking about the stranded assets, where a lot of investment and goodwill comes in to developing countries to help with, drinking water assets or the like. What happens to those if there's not the ownership from the women in the village?
So let me see if I understood the question, that what happens to the communities where the ownership isn't sort of shared?
No, it's where the goodwill of aid countries and organisations will come in and support the development of assets and then leave.
Yeah. So what we have experienced is that there is a lot of goodwill that is at play in these communities. However, when a community is part of the decision making, when a community is empowered with that you are buying this for yourself versus let us give this to you, their relationship with the asset completely changes. We noticed that in communities where a solar pump was sort of gifted, and there was no cohesion around the decision making, or rather around the ownership that this is now your asset as a community, we found that after a few months, a few of the panels would get stolen. Some kids would go and play with the equipment and it would kind of fall apart. There was no sort of maintenance agreement by the donors, because for them, they had felt that they've done their job by giving this asset, but there was no maintenance. So after a few months, maybe the pump stopped working, the community didn't have the resources to fix it. And so it was like, oh, well, someone came, gave this, it worked for a bit, and then it's gone. But when a community comes together and says, this is what we want, this is where we want it, this is, and we are paying for it, they come together, they build a boundary of, even if it's made of straw, it's just protective around the asset. And the whole sort of dynamic changes. And they become very careful also about the water use. For example, in the places that we work, and this brings us to sustainability, the water table is very low. And for a community which was first pulling water out of the ground, which meant that they were able to pull out a small amount, suddenly there's a pump now. And that has a potential of really depleting the water table. So we have to go and we tell the community that this is the case, and they will completely understand and be very careful around how many hours that pump works, and sort of make sure that they're not eating into.
So I guess you're saying is that what the difference that ownership brings to the equation is a sense of caring about the asset, and a sense of ownership of it means a sense of responsibility to it. Are there any other qualities about that kind of approach? I mean, one of the things that I've found in working in communities is that trust is incredibly important. And perhaps, Salma, you can share with us some of your experience where trust has been developed or not in a project, and what the results have been.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things, as if anyone's a consultant in the room would know, it takes a lot to build the trust with our clients, and building that relationship, and so that it's not seen as a client-consultant relationship. They buy, we give. It's more of a partnership, and that we're really contributing to the project that we're working on. I think just to the point that Ferial was making around ownership, I think there's more value to providing education to individuals and empowering them than just paying for things. There's more value around when you're looking at a community, and especially a less privileged community, around professionalizing things like water management for women, and providing them that empowerment. If anyone had the chance to visit the sustainability community next door, there's a great story around empowering a village in East Africa around solar panels, and they selected a few women to go to India for 6 months to learn about managing solar panels, and that has just tremendously changed the community and how they operate when it comes to fishing, for example, when it comes to studying for the younger generation. So I think there's a lot of value in empowering people and not just providing them that, the money or the gifting them kind of like solar panels or water infrastructure. And slowly, I guess that would build the trust within the community for them to be able to share their resources, whether it's water or other scarce resources.
And in your experience when you're dealing with an environment where you're advising on new infrastructure, and there's a lot of engineers in the room, how do you see your role, and how do you see yourself adding value to that environment?
It's really interesting. Just yesterday we had a call, and we were asked to share around women and the value they bring in to a table. I'm very grateful and very lucky to have always had leaders, including my father and my managers throughout my career, male managers, who've always said, "Speak up, Salma, you bring value to the table." I think for us women, it's the default that we always think that we need to work extremely hard to think that we bring value to the table, which is not true. We've talked about skills today, negotiation and empathy being just two of them that women bring to the table. But lost my train of thought there, Catherine. What was the question again?
It was a question about your experience in a contract negotiation. What value have you brought to the table with the colleagues sitting around in that negotiating room?
Thanks for the reminder. Just showing how I'm growing old and losing my brain cells. Thank you for that question. I was sharing earlier with Ferial around a story where typically in the UAE, it's not very common for women to be in the private sector. It's usually common to see them in the government sector. And so when I moved into the private sector more than 15 years ago, it was seen like, oh, it's lovely, cute, young Emirati in the, female Emirati in the private sector. But I was able to really learn a lot from my colleagues and be able to support in negotiations. And a very recent story where someone came up to me and said, oh, it's lovely to see Emiratis in the room and negotiate and sitting down at the table. And I was like, oh, yeah, but I'm here to negotiate, actually, around this contract. And it was a very interesting conversation, but I guess the skills that I have learned throughout my career, and just like we said, around the empathy and thinking about things that usually other people wouldn't think about, and bringing that equality to the table, problem-solving skills. These are really important skills that we bring to the table, which I think are very important, whether it's negotiating or working on different aspects of the project.
I'll give you a funny anecdote. When I was aspiring, well, when my boss was being promoted, I was, let's say, the runner-up to take his job, and I was at an event, and this lovely Belgium engineer who really likes me, we were standing in the line for food, and he goes, so Ilya, do you want Mr. Quijano's job? I said, of course. He goes, but you're a woman. I said, yes, so. And he has worked with me before. I mean, he was just like landing my thoughts. He goes, well, would you have 3 kids? He goes, yes, and you have a husband. I said, well, my husband will support me. My kids are old enough. He goes, well, you're going to have to do a lot of lobbying for that job. So to me, I thought, nah. But yes, the higher you go, the more your technical, professional capabilities are less important, and it's more how they see you. Can you be a leader? Can you negotiate? Because he said, this is a construction world, and you have a lot of negotiation to do in the construction. Yes. So my boss did all the lobbying for me. I didn't have to do any lobbying, but yes, the perception is that because you're a woman, you're weak, and you will not be able to negotiate. And that's the perception, but it's very far from the truth because, and I think you mentioned that before, when you are a mother, you negotiate every day with your kids. If you're married, you negotiate with your husband. So you do a lot of negotiation, so it's kind of second nature. It's just in a different arena. And if you know how to negotiate at home, then you should be able to negotiate any contracts or anything like that. But the perception that you're a woman is that you're going to be weak and you won't be able to do it. And on the contrary, I think because we are more about win-win, like you mentioned about the solar panels, again, man's like, this is mine, this is yours, this is pump. Women are more about win-win. I think we tend to be more yielding and then maybe have a better result in the long term on some of those negotiations.
Mariel, yes.
Also, what I've noticed is, I think women have this interesting skill where when you're at a table and you can kind of assess the mood of each individual, which sometimes I feel men tend to miss. And those nuances are so important during any kind of negotiation where you can read that this particular stakeholder and this particular stakeholder is kind of wearing off, and this is the one who I have to bring into the discussion. I feel like women have, which you talked to, Selma, the idea of empathetic leadership. That becomes so key, especially at the levels that you guys are now at, and I think that's the key skill.
It's a very good observation. It's what I find is that men tend to come into the room to negotiate with a perceived position that they want to get out of it at the end, whereas a woman will walk into the negotiation with what are the common threads and how we can drive a result that's going to be win-win. So it's the win-wins, the common threads, and it's being able to see that and see it for what it is and observe rather than just try and convince and present a position. It's a very different way of negotiating, and it's a very powerful way of negotiating.
But it's what's taught now. If you go to any business school, that's how they teach negotiation, is that you go into a room and this is what you want to get out of the room. So I think bringing in women even in curriculums is very important, whether it's like we're talking today around water resources. I think, Ferial, we discussed how our grandmas know more about rainfall and the patterns of rainfall because of how they observe. So bringing in women into curriculum and into education, I think, is very important for them to kind of change the way of thinking, like you just mentioned.
It is indeed. Indeed. So male-dominated decision-making versus female-dominated decision-making. It doesn't always work well when you've got all females in the room either, does it? Do you have any examples of when you've had all females in the room and it hasn't worked very well?
No, I wish I did. I really wish I did have an example, but I don't.
I don't either.
No, isn't that
not
funny?
in my trajectory.
And the reason why I ask that question is because I have, and it's usually in school councils or in sporting clubs rather than in the business sector, because the business sector is dominated largely by men. But in the realms where women dominate, where you have an all-women, it doesn't necessarily go well. So therefore, the importance of having that balance. Tell me about how, when you get more women around the table and the balance changes even more, how that's worked for you. You may not have had that example because you're really the only one at the top there, but...
Well, it was really funny. At one point, we have like 11 vice presidents in the canal, and at one point in time, I was the only woman, and my boss would turn around and say, Ilya, what do you think? I've heard all of their comments. What do you think? Because it's a different perspective. Now we are 4 women on the executive board. We have a woman in charge of environment, communications, human resources, and communication, environment, human resources, and me, operations, and me. So it's very interesting, the dynamics, you know, and how you relate to the woman and how you relate to the man. And it's nice because you can like discuss the position ahead of time. So you come with a unified front in the team. With men, it's a little bit more difficult, even though sometimes you can't do it. But having more women in the decision making, you know, men always lobby and they get like, so normally when I was the only woman with the 11 men, I was not included in this behind back doors talk about what do you think of this? I was always kind of left out. In a way, it was kind of good because it was like I was not contaminated. But it's always good to kind of be a sounding board behind to see where we want to move some decisions to. So I see the difference when I was the only one and now we're 4. It's nice. And I think it's more balanced. It's less like, okay, we all think this way, what do you think? Because then your voice has less power. And usually it's like, okay, I heard you, but unless it was something really good. And a really good manager of mine told me, like, you told them this 2 weeks ago. They could have listened to you, and it took them 2 more weeks to realize what you had said. So when you're the only voice, it does get a little bit longer to be accepted. Has been my experience.
How do you find it in the consulting world, Salma?
So similar to Ilya, like recently, I would say in the past few years, the percentage of women in the leadership team has increased, I find. But what I like to observe, so just like Ferial said, you know, sitting at the table, I like to observe people's behaviors and, you know, their body language. And so taking that lobbying, understanding how our counterparts act before making a decision, I would use those tactics and start discussing. And because I've already observed their body language and understand, like, okay, this is probably the path they're going to go down, so let me have a discussion. I'm going to have difficulty with, you know, convincing person A or B, so let me have a discussion with them. Just a story I'd like to share around, you know, getting more women around the table. We always have in the UAE a government summit, and the Prime Minister, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, openly said in one of these summits, I'm giving you the opportunity now to step up. because the women are coming up, and I am supporting them, and there's no stopping them. So here's the opportunity for you to step up. So that was such a shift in the tables, and seeing more of female ministers, like Her Excellency Mariam El Muhairi, who's in charge of the water and food security agenda, and the changes she's made, handpicked by His Highness, because he knows she's got those skills. So that was such a great shift to see, bringing more women, and openly saying, man, you need to catch up, by the way.
That's very good. Have you got any examples that you would like to share in that regard, Fariel? Perhaps when you were in the power industry.
Yes, definitely lots of stories there. You know, before, in my past life, before I, as my friends call me, a glamorous goat herd, I used to work in the power sector, and I was advising the government on policies and large grid-connected power projects. And one day I found myself being planted in the ministry in Pakistan, and it was kind of like a shock, like coming from a very sort of protected multilateral bank environment to the public sector. In Pakistan, that is actually rare, right? So I was there, and for the longest time, everyone kind of like, you know, I could do whatever I want, I could come when I wanted, nobody really cared, but I was there to I was like, I need to do something. And so I walked up to the minister at the time, and I said, here I am, this is what I do, this is what I can do, please involve me in stuff. And he kind of heard it, and soon I was invited to meetings. And I used to be the only female voice in that room. And I think it took a little while for me also to get that sort of confidence to be able to speak up, like you said, that you were told, speak up. And I started speaking up, and I noticed first few times I was ignored, second few times I was ignored, but after a while people did start hearing me. And as long as I persisted, I think I got heard, and it became a very normal part for me to then be part of the conversations. But it took a while. It took a little bit of time.
Yeah, so the lesson there is that really have patience and persistence and respect. You're changing culture, and the culture is a very male-dominated culture, and culture doesn't change overnight. So it's incredibly challenging. So with the water resources area, so perhaps we'll focus more in water resources now, and where women need to play a role, and where women may have a lot of value to add in that space. You talked about the watershed area where the ownership of titles to land was important and involving them in the management of the land. What about in policy? Do you see that there's any shift towards more women being involved in policy making around the Panama Canal? And
in Panama, as a country, yes, we have seen a change. You need to like it, you need to want it, because it's a difficult area, policy making in Panama. But I think it's important that more women get involved in it, because then you will see a shift. But yes, I see there is, like I mentioned, in the advisory councils, there's 38% women in the big group, and then in the smaller groups, about, I think it's 54% women. So those women will, in this watershed area, will make a big impact in decision making, and then that will bring up to policy for making laws. And I think it's very important because, like we've been mentioning, our focus is a little bit more empathic, and we see more the long term. Also, I think women are very good at looking long-term vision and not immediate reward. And I think that's very important for policy making, because you need to look forward, you need to look ahead long term.
Ariel, just in what role do men need to play in this conversation?
I think an important role, as Salma was saying, is that of being the champions and the sort of what's the term? There's a term for this, which you had used, and it was so well.
Sponsor.
Sponsors, kind of like the allies in bringing forward women. And these allies are found everywhere. I have found them at the highest level of government. I have found them within the communities that I work with, where a man will be like, I want my cousin or my sister or my mother, speak to her as well, bring her in, and will be there to make sure that her voice is heard. I think that's the role in these cases.
What do you think, Salma?
Similar to Ferial, male allies coming in, giving women the space. It's okay to speak up, giving them that space. I always used to think when I go into male-only meetings, like Ilya mentioned, is I need to spread my bag and my notes to give myself that space. Whereas now, we've got more women, but more male allies. They are automatically giving me that space to speak up. It's that mentoring as well. I think just looking at history, after World War II, we see a lot of men who have gone into engineering, building infrastructure, and I think there's a lot to learn there. A lot of women missed out on that era. So there's a lot of kind of like brain dump. I always joke with my male colleagues, like, there's a lot of information up here. Can I download it into a terabyte, please, so that we can share it with everyone? I think mentoring and knowledge sharing is really important as well.
It is indeed. Water resource management and managing our waters more effectively and efficiently is a lot more than just the technical side of things and innovation side of things. And it is really deeply involved in changing people's behaviours and their attitudes towards the value of water. Where do you start in that, Ilya? How do you actually take the first step in a journey to start to develop a new culture and thinking?
Well, we in Panama, because of what I mentioned about the rainfall patterns have changed. Before, we took it for granted completely. I mean, water was like, we spill water every year, so it was a need. So we have approached it in 3 different areas. We have made joint agreements with universities, so they can push the importance of water conservation in our country and don't take it for granted like we used to. You know, the car washes every corner, just watering the grass every day. So universities are teaching us innovation on how to make systems more efficient and preserve more. Young kids in school about how to preserve water, use it the minimum, use it when you need it, you know, and we use very visual effects. And so, you know, have somebody brushing their teeth, running water like nothing, and you have a kid having to go to a well to go pick up water. So you need to embed it in the youth so they grow with that new mentality. You need to get the universities to look for new ideas. I mean, we've never used to do water harvesting from rain. I mean, now you see 2 or 3 areas that are doing that in the watershed, in hotels. It's stuff you never thought of because you never had a need. I mean, when you have scarcity, when you need something, is when you become creative. And also with the government, we have a joint. We are government, but we're an autonomous entity. But we're part of the government in protecting all of our water resources. And we have done a lot of studies on how to increment water, different ways. Like I mentioned, this $2 billion project, we're looking at different ways of doing things. So I think you need to look at, you cannot just concentrate on one area, you need to do it all around to be able to make it sustainable and long-term.
And from a consultant's point of view at GHD, how do you feel, Selma, that we need to think about that? Because you've got a lot of people who are technically minded in the consulting world.
I think it's challenging people, and when I say people, I say our clients. A lot of times we go into a room and have a discussion around a project that's coming up, and it's all about, to your point, men wanting to commercialize stuff. So a recent project we worked on, where there was an entity that wanted to privatize a specific sector within water. And the director, who happened to be female, director for policy, came in and said, why? We can generate so-and-so, and here are the graphs. And she said, but why? Why would we want to do this? Our biggest problem is water scarcity and the need for education and awareness. If we focus in this sector, the returns are going to be higher in the long term. and looking at water tariffs and pricing as well. So I think really it's asking the right questions and challenging and not being afraid to challenge. For us as consultants, any consultant, it's easy to go into a room and say, yes, I'll do this project for you for this price. But what value are we really bringing to the community? I think that's the question to ask.
Yeah. And trade up, Veriel.
Upgrade, yes. I think for me, the learning has been that, water has been given to us as consumers, kind of like from nature. And we've had to do very little for it. Learning that, no, it's actually something which is finite, which has to be preserved, has to kind of come from within, kind of like the communities that we work with, instead of them getting a pump from somewhere else and then they get water, right? It's for us also to know that this is not a free resource. This is something which we have to really take care of. And also in terms of seeing these communities and the women and how they struggle with the water there has really made me appreciate things and water especially, how easily it's available to us and how we're kind of like the guardians here of this water.
We are indeed. And it's an interesting question. One of the terms you use there is people paying for water, valuing water and actually paying for water. And I think one thing that the water industry does really badly is sell what we actually do. And often we talk about people don't want to pay for water because it should be free. Mm-hmm. Water is a fundamental like air. So why are we paying for water? But are we really paying for water? Are we actually paying for the water, or are we paying for the pumps and the pipes and the dams mm-hmm. and the electricity that delivers that water from where it falls to your house? People will buy it in a bottle. And they will pay, I think it's about 1,000 times the price that they will pay at tap on average around the world to buy it in a bottle. The value in the bottle has been defined and sold well. I think our utilities have got a long way to make the same case for the water that comes out of their taps. And I think we can do part of all of that as women. It's now time to go to the audience for questions. We've got about 15 minutes for questions, so I'm really keen to hear what your thoughts are following that really interesting discussion, and thank you to you all for your participation in that.
Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? Yes.
It has been my personal experience.
That's the microphone coming. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's been my personal experience that in the face of diversity and, not diversity, adversity, that's what I meant to say, adversity and hardship, that women are stronger than men. That's my personal opinion, and I've observed it, and I can say that objectively. So the challenges that strength has to require is that you have two challenges here: saving water, raising people's consciousness of water, and the equality of the genders. So I would imagine in order to achieve the former, you would need to reach the latter, meaning the equality of genders. Governments can legislate equality, but has it been your experiences that your peers, your male peers, embrace that legislation or that concept or that thought? That's my question.
And it's a really good question. And I'll start, and then I'm going to hand to the panel for their views on that one. In 1902, the South Australian Parliament was the second parliament in the world to give the vote to women. It was also the first parliament in the world to enable women to be elected to the parliament through the legislative process. It took 50 years before the first woman was elected to the parliament. So yes, you can change laws, but once again, you have to change culture and attitude for those laws to come into effect. And good laws, 90% of the population will obey without question, or more, most instances. However, in that instance, it took a very, very long time. Ilya?
Well, I have to say that I changed my mind in quotas. I never believed in quotas because I never needed a quota to reach the location where I got to my job. But when I got selected to be the vice president of engineering, which was my highest, first really C-suite level position, and I heard what my Belgian friend told me, and I saw the lobbying my boss had to do for me to get the job, I changed my mind, and I said quotas are needed, because otherwise it's just going to take forever. Because what quotas do, and some people like, the quota means you're going to give a woman. No, you're going to, like I said, I'm digging for women in operations now. If you have a quota that you need to fulfill, then you will look for the talent. If you don't have a quota, you won't bother, because if you have 100 men and 5 women, the pool is huge. So you'll just pick from here. But if you're forced to look at the 5 women and you see their qualifications, and you say, wow, there's one that's really good. Because just because you're a woman doesn't make you get the job. But you have to be a really good woman. But for you to be able to look at means you have the qualifications. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the pool to be selected. So I think definitely I do believe in quotas, because it will not take then the 50 years or 90 years or 80 years to reach that parity. It will take a shorter period of time. It will still take time, yes, but it will take a shorter period of time. We have a law in Panama that 30% of the board directors of regulated companies have to be women. I think we're not there yet, but some companies I think have reached like 12%, and our own company, the Panama Canal, in our board directors, for the first time, we're going to have 2 women board director members. Previously, we had 1. But really, honestly, we should have 3. And we just got 3 new board members appointed. I was hoping that the 3 will be women, but at least we got 2 women and 1 man. So I think quotas are important.
Yes, I would agree. Selma, what do you think?
I think, to your point, legislation and regulation and policies are very important. They're a foundation, but we constantly need to iterate. We constantly need to send out that message in order to have kind of like the stick, I guess, which is the quotas, in order for those quotas to be fulfilled. In the 70s, when Sheikh Zayed first formed this country, he actually went knocking on doors, asking families to allow women to go into the workplace, asking families to allow women to go into education. I gave a talk 5 years ago at a local university, women's university, and a young lady came up to me and said, you know that I won't be allowed to go to work, I'm only allowed to study. So it's still something that we constantly need to reiterate, constantly need to talk about, even though it's in the foundation, it's embedded in our values. But like Catherine said, culture takes time to change. And for people to catch up and to change the mindset, that takes a very long time. So I think it is a constant challenge. But when we've got males like you saying things like, I think your women are stronger, and we need to look at this. And when we have women like in leadership positions pulling in other women, I think that really helps.
Viryl.
So I believe that policy is actually the very first step to actually changing things, and it doesn't mean that it will immediately change things. So I run a startup, and one of the issues that we were just here in Dubai with a group of entrepreneurs, and what we were told is that, look, when you put your pitch deck for the first time to an investor, you will be looked at differently, and it does happen. As a female-founded company, the kind of questions that I get versus my male counterparts are very different. The kind of scrutiny I get is extremely different. I would have proved my sort of thesis, I would have been earning enough money, but men will come up with an idea and they will raise funds. Women will have a successful business, and they'll be asked about risks. But now there's a whole drive towards VCs putting in more money towards women-led businesses, and it's just the starting point. Even now, I think only 20% of the VC funds go to businesses, but it's a starting point, and it takes a while, and it has to start somewhere for it to then grow. So that's my view on it.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Do you have any questions from our audience online? Yes, there's one up the back. Thank you.
Hi, yes. So from the virtual audience, you all were just, so thank you already. We got a bunch of thank yous. And just talking about more about the education in the universities and so I'm just trying to pull up the full question, but it's just how to push more girls into STEM and STEAM, and how is that being seen in all of your different countries and regions?
I might start with you, Salma. I think this is an area of keen interest of yours, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It is something that I advocate for a lot. I'm a mentor to a lot of young professionals in the workplace and who are currently in their tertiary education. And so what I've seen that has worked is when governments have scholarships geared towards women, and then specifically in things like renewable energy and engineering and technology, having kind of like associations or groups to support women, whether it's in education or eventually in the workplace. We have a lot of hats on as women. We have lots of identities that we play to. So, you know, you're a mom, you're in the workplace, you're a teacher, and so to support all of those identities, we need to be given, I guess, the right ecosystem to do so. So, I think in order to encourage that, it's really important to have encourage that education through things like scholarships, things like mentorship programs, and also providing them the right ecosystem to support, for example, parents, whether it's in education or in the workplace, and other identities that women play as well.
Leon?
There's many different ways. I am in two associations. I am a judge for the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering, and I am also an advisory board for Fundapromat, which is a national foundation for math and sciences for little kids. So you need to take it from the two stages, again, like the water. The Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering, it's a wonderful prize. It's from London, and it gives a prize to an engineering innovation that has impacted the world significantly. And the people that came up with this had to be alive. So it's really amazing because when they give the prize, and the different people that have gotten it is the GPS, the magnets, you discover what these inventions do for humanity, for the world, how they impact, and how these technologies. So it's a really attractive way to get people to know, like, wow, if I study engineering, and you portray the different engineerings, you know, if it's materials, if it's electrical, if it's civil, if it's electronics. So you kind of open the world of people that what engineering can achieve. Then the little kids, you know, you teach them. When you see the movies, you see the astronaut, you know, and, oh, the astronaut is great, but yeah, how did he get to the moon? You know, he went into the rocket, and how did that rocket was built? So then, because always engineers portray like, oh, it's boring, it's number, it's difficult. So if you portray the beauty that engineering results, like the building we're in, the screen we're seeing, the lamps, all that is engineering. So I think it's how you teach, then people will get enamored with the career, with I want to do something. And a lot of people want to do something good for the world. Mm-hmm. So STEM is a great way to do something good for the world. So I think you need to present it in different ways, because when you look at the end, you won't think if the path is difficult or not. And if it's something you like, it will be easier, even if it's not that easy. You will persevere. You will go for it. So I think it's very important that you have different associations. And I wish the movie world would be more about how you get to things than the end product. The astronaut is great, but the people that build the rocket is great too. So I think it will make it more attractive for people to go into STEM careers.
And it comes back to a point that you made earlier, Salma, which was around the issue of, you talk about STEM in schools and the training, it's the unconscious biases, is the word I'm looking for. So there's so many unconscious biases in our own homes, let alone when we go out into the real world. You know, tell us about the kind of unconscious biases that have developed over time in the cultures that you work and live in.
I think being like things like STEM, being an engineer and studying things like math and science, it's not really encouraged. I would say in this culture previously wasn't really encouraged. Like I remember when I graduated as in environmental science, my mom was like, "Oh, darling, like, do you really want to work in environment science? And like, what are you gonna do? It's in waste. Like, do you really want to work in waste, sweetie?" Yeah, Mom, I really do want to work in waste and build waste infrastructure. And but slowly, you know, when she started seeing how like I'm really happy and doing really well, and then my younger cousins would come up to me, "Hey, how did you get into that?" So she's like, "Oh, right, okay, you're doing something great, actually." I'm like, "Yeah, Mom, I am." And so I think slowly we're starting to see that change. And in our culture, we've got a lot of social conformity is very important. So I think if others are doing it, then it's okay for us to do it. And so, and probably same in your culture as well. And so I think it's really important for us to encourage people to go into STEM and STEAM in order to get that social conformity for a culture like ours. And in terms of unconscious bias, I think this is in everyone really. We all have our biases. But breaking the bias, things like, for example, when we're advertising for vacancies in consulting, we always make sure the language we're using is gender neutral, for example. So I think everyone comes with their unconscious bias. It's just a matter of really reflecting and, I guess, identifying where you can break those biases.
You know, we got recently certified by the Women Empowerment Principles of the United Nations. And we had to go through an audit. And what you just said, we were advertising for all these jobs having a picture of a man. And we're like, wow. And it came out of the audit. And it was funny, women been driving for years. I think 2 years ago, we got the first women driver in the Panama Canal. Oh. Yeah. Out of about 800 drivers. Because we never kind of advertised that, you could be a driver.
Yeah.
But, yeah. We see the change, but unconscious bias is even at the company level, and we're an equal opportunity employer, but you just don't realize it. So little things like that can make a difference too.
Absolutely.
And what's it like in Pakistan?
So in Pakistan, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about my own journey, and also generally, I was supposed to become a doctor, like most South Asian kids are, and especially and my brother and my sister are, because it's supposed to be an easy career for women. There are these easy careers which don't require much interfacing with the public, similar to like the women we work with in the communities who don't ever go out into the marketplace to sell their goats, because women interfacing in public is not considered safe, and at times it really isn't. But I think, as you were saying, Salma, our society is also very sort of, if it's okay for someone else, then it's okay for us. So you have to do it by example. I think we have these societies now in Pakistan where women in engineering, women in energy, and having these societies come together to be a support to each other, number one, and then to sort of showcase that there are these women who are working in all of these areas, which kind of makes it okay for the next generation of the little cousins and the next generation to come in and do this. That has been important.
It is indeed. Do we have one? We've probably got time for one more question, I think. Caroline, is that right? Yes? Yep. We've got one more on the floor, and then we might go to one more on virtual if we've got time.
Thank you so much for everything you were just sharing, and definitely it's clear that having women at the table makes better water resource decisions in the longer term. Definitely in Australia we do a lot to try and provide opportunities for women to get them at the table, but there's not necessarily the same support for moving men away from the table, and I don't mean that to say women replacing them, but providing them the opportunity to work a flexible work-life balance, be at home for the first 6 months of their child's life, all of those things that women have fought so long to get, which has been fantastic for us to be able to then have those opportunities. But I almost think we're somewhat hindered because we are still trying to be the woman at work and the woman at home, and we carry the mental load and all of those kind of things that the men don't necessarily do, and they don't want to step away from the full-time working role because that's almost sometimes the easier position to be in. Have you got any suggestions on how we can sort of try and progress moving in that other direction to provide, I guess, more women with further opportunities, but also men with different opportunities than what they've probably historically had?
Thanks, Simona. It's a really good question. It's not so much about men stepping aside, whilst that does need to happen if the places are going to be taken by women. And let's be realistic, that is the case, unless you double your board size in every organisation. So the question, I think, is around how do we actually create the opportunity for men to have more flexibility in the workplace as well, and take that little bit more responsibility in sharing and in the other job that we have, which is our families.
Well, in Panama, they just put a law that men are, I think they get 3 days or a week, 2 weeks of leave when the spouse gives birth. So at least it's paid leave. So the man can go and share, with the wife when the baby comes. So that's really good. And I think I tell the young girls, I do a lot of mentoring too, to young girls that want to go into careers. And I says, if you're going to get married, if you want to get married, make sure you choose the right partner that he would share it with you, because I've been married 33 years and I have to say my husband has been sharing the load with me and everything. Actually, I hate grocery shopping. He does the shopping and he goes to the laundry. And when our kids were little, if I couldn't make doctor's appointments, he would take them. So it's about choosing the right person that is willing to share that journey with you. And laws like giving the father 2 weeks of paternity leave. So it's a balance.
I think we have the same husband. I've been very fortunate in my career that my husband has been very prepared to take on the role of that supporting spouse in the relationship, and raise and look after most of the raising of my daughter while I was in my parliamentary career. And I don't think it would have been possible if I'd had to burden. To shoulder the burden of both jobs, because it is very, very busy, as it is with the Panama Canal. Salma, do you have anything to add?
I think post-COVID, I am seeing, Simone, that there are changes being made. I would speak for our organization. The realization that men also share workload at home. And last year, there's been a revision to, we call it parenthood leave. And men, they've increased the men's leave. So I think that's something that we are finding, or a trend that we are seeing at the moment, post-COVID. It's really interesting because in this part of the world, a lot of people think, it's all the women who are doing things. But in our culture, actually the Prophet Muhammad, he was doing the sewing, he was doing the cleaning to support his wife. So I think it's ingrained in our culture. We just forgot about it because men went into the workplace, and it was seen as, right, he's the breadwinner, I'm going to do this. So women speaking up, but also men speaking up to say, hey, I've got to go pick up my kids, so I'm going to need some time off. And in the workplace, providing that equality, I guess, is important.
Ferial?
As this chat was going on, I was thinking about the roles and the traditional roles that women and girls are seen to have to fulfill within the communities that we work in. One of the really unanticipated impacts that we found was once a pump was installed, suddenly girls' school attendance went up. And we were really kind of like, how did this happen? And it was because girls were expected to help their mothers every single day to go and collect that water and bring it to their homes. So they would have to miss school. And if that is happening within communities who really don't have access to much education, and that is still happening in communities where now we are all a lot more sort of aware, it's time to change the gender stereotypes and really kind of look at how humanity has evolved in terms of where women were sort of seen as labor and men owned women and property, to now women are sort of part of the labor force and owning and are equal. So I think that has to kind of change and evolve at every single step. And that is something that we hope that we see.
Verial, goats. How many goats do you have?
I have hundreds and hundreds of goats.
And do you leave the goats with the villagers, or where do the goats go when you pick the goat? When you trade in goats?
Oh, so when we trade the goats, they come into our collection areas and we raise them until we sell them to grocery chains, and now we have our own meat brand. That's what
Very
we're doing.
good. And that funds the pumps.
Yes, and that finances the pumps. So we're thinking of an alternate currency.
Yep.
I mean, in this day and age when we're thinking about cryptos and altcoins, why not enabling people to use what they have more of as currency?
Which is goats. A remarkable story. So just to leave us at the end of today's session, and I really hate to draw it to a close because I've been so much enjoying the conversation with you all, but everything does have to come to an end. And so could you leave us with just a couple of lines on what message you'd like to leave the group or the room with, and our viewers online, with about women and water, and the key message you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think water is key for women and men. It's a precious resource that we depend on, and I think we work together as women and men in preserve that precious resource that we need to live.
Exactly right. Selma?
I think, like Ilya said, the water story is ours to share with men. So I'd encourage women to make waves and to change this world. The world needs us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Selma.
From what I've seen, I believe women would be better at managing and making decisions around water, and I think it should be something which should be predominantly managed by women, in my opinion.
Well, I have to agree with all of you. I think it's been a wonderful journey that we've taken our audience on today. I work in a number of organisations, and one of those is WaterAid, and WaterAid is an international organisation that provides drinking water and sanitation services in developing countries. But it doesn't do it through the provision of pumps and pipes, it does it through the provision of capacity development within local regions to enable them to be the decision makers, the purchasers and the investors in their own assets. And it's a wonderful organisation to be involved in. And what it has done is it's opened my eyes into the range of different localised situations that people find themselves in, and having something like goats as the answer in that particular circumstance is a really good, and it's a shining light for us to think about things differently, because engineers would not think like that normally. So that currency of goats is a really fabulous story. So what can we do in the localised communities that we're in to ensure that we're actually appropriately engaging with them and enabling them to be part of this decision-making and the solutions at the local level, and in ownership, and investment can be theirs. So thank you, ladies. It's been an absolute joy learning all about your past experiences and learning all about your thoughts around women in leadership roles, but also women in the water space and what we can do together with men in our water story. Let's all make some waves. Our speakers are going to be around for a few more minutes, so if any audience members would like to keep discussing any of the questions or the discussions that we've had, you're most welcome, and I'm sure our generous panellists here will make themselves available to you. I'd like to also thank the Australian Pavilion for co-hosting this session, and I see Claire here, and I thank you for all you've done, Claire, in helping to bring this together. I'd like to say a big thank you to the Women's Pavilion also, working with the Australian Pavilion. And of course, the World Majlis. It's an amazing opportunity to be a part of this worldwide discussion, and I'm certain it's going to be a discussion we're going to have for many decades to come, because the water journey doesn't end anywhere. It is a continuous journey, and certainly in the face of climate change, it will happen. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to our viewers online. It's been wonderful to have you with us, and you can find out more and watch all of the previous Majlis and Women's World Majlis conversations on the Virtual Expo 2020 website. So please make sure you click on that site and have a look and see what the other discussions have been about. So that wraps up our session today, and so thank you all for being here, and can I ask you to thank our panellists once again for their wonderful contribution. Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun. That was fantastic.